Hi, everybody. I'm Morgan Loew at the CBS 5 3 TV Arizona's Family Studio in Phoenix.
And I'm Kim Powell in Rexburg, Idaho, and this is episode 0 of our new podcast, True Crime Arizona, Lori Vallow's Deadly Delusion.
Kim is in Rexburg this week because Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell were indicted on charges related to the murders of J.J. Vallow, Tylee Ryan, and Tammy Daybell. And Kim, it's no coincidence that you were the only TV reporter who was there for this announcement about these charges. You have some serious sources and connections to this case. So let's start with this. How did you end up in Idaho this Monday before this announcement came out?
Yeah, as you said, I have a couple sources, and not only do I have these sources, but also this case is so widespread. Everyone's talking about it online. So I have my sources plus people on social media. There's a lot of rumblings on social media that something was happening. And so I said, hey, I think something's about to break in the Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell case. We don't quite know what it is just yet, but we should at least go and see what we can find. It's also close enough to the 1-year anniversary of J.J. and Tylee's bodies being found. So nonetheless, it was a good time to get to Rexburg, Idaho, to see what we can find out. And sure enough, on Tuesday, we got that tip that they were going to have a press conference in 1 hour and that we needed to be there. And that's when they released the indictment.
We sort of suspected that these indictments were going to be handed up. There was a lot of talk, as you mentioned, on social media. And although we can't go with that when we're reporting something, certainly was enough, that with your sources as well, to get out there. Now, Tuesday rolls around and they announce that Chad and Lori have both been indicted on 3 murder charges, as well as conspiracy to commit murder and some other charges. So just right off the bat, you've been covering this story since the beginning. So have I. Were you surprised at these 3 murder charges?
In a way, I was surprised at the first-degree murder charges just because everyone has been pinning the murders on Alex Cox, who, of course, passed away in 2019. So everyone's how much of a role did Lori and Chad play in these murders? And so the thought going into this was, okay, maybe they'll at least be charged with conspiracy to commit murder. So to have these 3 first-degree murder charges on top of that was, I think, pretty big.
Yeah, to come up with a conspiracy charge, they only have to show that they were involved in some way, either in the planning of it or the carrying out or afterwards. To come up with that first-degree murder charge, I mean, this is malice aforethought. This is planning ahead of time. This is not an accident. This was something that they were working on and carried through this. When I looked at the indictment, there's some interesting details on here, some times, but there wasn't a lot of actual mentioning of evidence. And for a first-degree murder charge, they're going to need a lot of this evidence. When you looked at this indictment, what stood out to you?
Yeah, well, right off the bat, seeing that it says on or between October 26, 2018 and June 9th, 2020, that's kind of where this all started. So automatically I have a lot of questions about October 2018. We do have an idea that that's around the time that Lori and Chad first met. So I think that's where that date comes. But as we know, most of these crimes happened in 2019. So that right there tells us that this has been a planned out thing. And it also says that they're using their religious beliefs for the purpose of, quote, justifying the homicide of J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan. So that's also something that that really stood out to me. And then, of course, you have the part where it says that they were cashing in on J.J. and Tylee's Social Security funds, and they moved funds from Tylee's bank to Lori's bank. So, like you said, that kind of shows that it was premeditated and well thought out before they carried out the action.
Yeah, that time frame that they lay out there, it was earlier than I thought, that the crimes sort of had started. And what the prosecutors have done here is they've laid out this October 26, 2018 to June 9th, 2020 as that's the time frame that all the evidence in this case is going to come from. And like you said, maybe October 26, 2018 is when they met, or maybe that's the first time that prosecutors have any evidence of them conspiring to commit these crimes. And then June 9th, 2020, the beginning of June, is when they found the remains of the children at Chad's property there. And so that's the end of that, that sort of time frame. So I am really interested to see what comes up in the trial that shows that this was planned and premeditated, and when sort of they met, because we don't have a lot of information. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of information about Chad and Lori's interactions prior to the summer of 2019. Have you read or heard much about that?
Not much about it. I know that around that time in 2018, there's reports that they were at a Preparing a People conference together, and they were doing podcasts together from what it sounds like. But I believe, if I remember correctly, Chad had been to Lori's house in Arizona before, and Charles had even met him. And there was some sort of connection between the two then. And in that sense, it was, oh, Chad's going to stay with us because we have this conference that we're going to. And they were just, I don't want to say friends, but acquaintances at that point.
Yeah, so many unanswered questions and sort of surprises about when they interacted and when they were around each other there. I want to switch to another part of the indictment here, and this is what caught me by surprise, was the Tammy Daybell murder charges, because we haven't heard really anything about how she died. We know that the autopsy was out for a long time. That took a long time to complete. It came in this fall, or this winter, I'm sorry, but investigators did not release the cause of death. So when that was included in this indictment, what was your reaction?
Yeah, I think that was huge. Even a woman next to me in the press conference kind of took a deep breath. I think she was shocked as well to hear that Tammy Daybell is now included in these deaths as, something where it was a homicide. But to read this part of the indictment, like you said, they don't really talk about how she died. So we still don't know what they found in the autopsy, which, of course, her body was exhumed about, I think it was 2 months after she had passed away. So her body was exhumed. Then they do the autopsy, and we still haven't seen those autopsy results. But reading this part in the indictment, and it talks about text messages between Chad and Lori about Tammy being in limbo and Tammy being possessed by a spirit named Viola. That is interesting to me because, as we know, Lori thought Charles Vallow, her previous husband, she thought he was Nick Schneider. So they think that, their spouses were possessed by some sort of spirit. And then, of course, you have this other point in the indictment that Chad signed an application with Tammy to increase her life insurance policy to the maximum. And that's right before her death. Actually, that looks like it is on the day that Tylee was at scene. So a lot in this is shocking to me, especially the part where it also says that Alex Cox, Lori's brother, attempted to shoot Tammy on October 9th, 2019. And we do know that she posted on Facebook saying, hey, someone just shot at me, and I don't know who it was. So a lot is interesting in here. It also shows that Alex was searching on the internet, certain things like something related to a Grendel drop and shooting through a Dodge Dakota. And then he was also going to a gun range right before her death. So it all goes back to that premeditated stuff. So I'm really curious to see what we learn in the autopsy, because all we know right now is that she passed away in her home, and at the time it was she passed away in her sleep.
Yeah, you take a look at this indictment, and it sort of stands out to me in two ways. One, it tells us that prosecutors have drawn conclusions in what they've found, and
right.
Murder and premeditation and that kind of thing. But it also sort of, stands out to me as sort of a hint at what they have as far as the evidence that they have. And it's sort of lays out a framework of what we are going to see as this goes to trial. It sort of explains that the prosecutors are going to lay out a scenario where Chad and Lori use their fringe religious beliefs to encourage themselves or others, namely probably Alex, to commit these crimes. It gives us a little bit of a glimpse at some of the evidence they might have, which are text messages between them. We didn't really know about those before. And then it tells us that there's some physical evidence there about these shootings. So I'm really interested to see what comes out. And here's the thing, because they did this indictment, we may not get any of this evidence until and unless this makes it to trial. I know the defense is going to get this evidence through the discovery phase of this, but that's not going to be, those things aren't going to be made public. So there's going to be a lot of wait and see when it comes to this. But I want to move forward here and ask you a couple of questions about what you saw when Chad and Lori made their first court appearances after being indicted. How did Lori look?
Yeah, so it was interesting to have this court hearing for both of them, just for the fact that we haven't seen them since last year. They usually don't show up to their court appearances. It's just their attorneys. So Lori noticeably looks different. She has a lot longer hair. It looks like it's dark brown with streaks of blonde in it. And of course, we've seen her this entire time with bleach blonde hair. So that was a major difference. Also stood out to us that she was wearing a face mask, but nobody else was. And again, that was a virtual hearing. So we were kind of scratching our heads about that, wondering if there was a reason she was wearing a mask or what was behind that. And as far as Chad's hearing goes, what really stood out to me was his laughter. Right when the hearing started, the judge said, "Chad, can you hear me?" And he says, "Yes." And he chuckled and he says, "Can you hear me?" It was just kind of eerie to watch him laugh like that and smile, given the charges that he was about to be read.
Yeah, it's almost like he's just sort of mentally removed from reality, from what's happening here. The last thing that we really heard from Chad was the day that they discovered the remains. We have that recording of the phone call where it just, out of coincidence, he and Lori were on the phone that morning, and she was talking to him, and he really, sounded like a scared little boy in that conversation. And then we see him this week, and he's giggling like it just didn't seem like he understood the gravity of what was happening.
Yeah, it was really odd. And I remember in his preliminary hearing back in August, he also had a couple moments where he was laughing and smiling in the courtroom. As we're hearing from detectives and from witnesses about what they found on his property, not that he was laughing in those moments, but just the fact that he's being accused of these things and he's still finding a way to laugh and chuckle, it's odd.
Yeah, and so we have that hearing that took place, or we had that court appearance that took place with them. And then there's another aspect to this, and that is, the relatives, aside from Chad and Lori, the other relatives of the children, and Kay and Larry Woodcock, who were out there for this event. You've spoken to them. You've kept in touch with them. How did they react to what happened this week?
Well, when the charges came down, when we learned about them, we were told, hey, it's a rough day for them. They're just going to go in their hotel room and just lay low. And I think it was really overwhelming for them for a lot of reasons. Obviously, because we're talking first-degree murder charges, we're talking conspiracy, and so many other things. But also, all of these charges, this indictment was released on what would have been JJ's 9th birthday. So wow. It was already an emotional day for them because JJ's not here. And as they told me, we can only imagine what he'd be up to right now at 9 years old. So it was already a hard day for them. And then to hear the indictment and hear what the charges are, hear that there was premeditation, it was a hard day for them. I did talk to them the next day. They're in a bit better spirits. They're happy that charges are finally being filed, and this is a step towards justice. And they did mention, they're like, you know what, though? We still got a long ways to go, and we want everyone who was involved in these murders or involved in these crimes, we want them to be held accountable, too. And they firmly believe that it's more than just Lori and Chad.
Really? They think there are more involved. That is interesting. I can't imagine what different emotions would have gone through their minds because, I mean, let's face it, if it weren't for Kay and Larry, we don't know if investigators would have even begun looking into this case because they're the ones that kept beating the drum that something's wrong. We haven't heard from these kids. They had to hire a private investigator to look into this and really get the police to understand that this is not right. Did you get any sense from them that they felt like, okay, at least part of what we set out to do is now going into motion?
Oh, absolutely. This has been a marathon for them. They've told me that for the last year and a half, that they kind of realize they just have to be patient as the process works itself out. Of course, with the pandemic, even the Fremont County prosecutor said we haven't been able to get a grand jury together because of COVID-19 restrictions. So they've had to have a lot of patience throughout all of this. But I think Kay and Larry knew from the beginning that something was up, and they've wanted people to be held accountable this entire time, and it's finally paying off.
And Kim, we've got some breaking news in this story that continues to develop, and this is on a part of this story that didn't have anything to do with what took place in Rexburg, but it's out of the aspect of this case from Chandler. And I'm going to read you what we just received from the Chandler Police Department. It said, "Good morning. The Chandler Police Department submitted its investigation involving Lori Vallow and the death of Charles Vallow to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office on April 1st, 2021. The submitted charge is conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. It is currently under review by the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. Please note all charging decisions are to be determined by the Maricopa County Attorney's Office." So, Kim, this other aspect of this case, the death of Charles Vallow, now in the hands of the Maricopa County Attorney's Office.
Yeah, this is huge. Just yesterday, I was speaking to Kay, that's Charles' sister, and she was saying, next on our radar is Chandler, Arizona. Obviously, before this broke, in fact, I'm going to text her here in a little bit to see if I can get, some sort of reaction from her, see how she's feeling about this. But this is huge because at the time that Charles was shot and killed in July 2019, Lori's brother, Alex Cox, who shot him, he was claiming self-defense. And Chandler police kind of, they let Alex walk free that day. They never charged him for anything. He was still under investigation for this. But Alex died in December of 2019. So he can't really answer to any of this right now. But the fact that Lori is now possibly facing this conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, which is a similar charge to what she's facing here in the deaths of J.J. Tiley and Tammy. This is a big development.
Yeah, it is something that Chandler police had said they were going to do, but it was there's sort of an information blackout for the last probably 6 months on this. We had heard that they had said that they were going to submit these charges to the county attorney's office, and then we didn't hear anything, and now they're confirming that in April 1st of this year, they did submit those charges. We have not heard anything from the county attorney about whether or not they're going to proceed with charging in this case, but this is part of this story that is developing now, and we're going to continue to report on it.
Yeah, this is a big development, and we're coming back from Rexburg, Idaho right now, so I'm sure once we get to Arizona, we can learn even more and dive into this a little bit deeper.
So many people who have been affected by this case, and out there in Rexburg, I was there a year ago when Lori was brought in to face charges from Hawaii. You were there as well, and I remember at that time we would go work in this coffee shop every morning with our computers and figure out what we were going to do for the day, and we sort of got to know the woman who owned the coffee shop, and we were there I think about 5 days, and the last morning we stopped in to grab coffee and say goodbye, and at that point the woman behind the counter said, Yeah, Tammy Daybell was one of my good friends. We worked together at the school district, and it just, the look on her face and the realization to me that this was a family that was established there. One of these victims, knew so many people, and it really has affected that community. What was your sense of how the community reacted this week to these charges coming down?
Yeah. We went out to the memorial where Chad's property is. It's right across from the yard where the kids were found, and we were at the memorial shooting video, and some cars started stopping by and just talking to us, saying like, "Hey, isn't it such a tragedy?" And everything in this has really affected people. And this one woman stopped by to drop off some flowers for JJ and Kylie. Again, it being JJ's birthday. And she said, "Oh, it's just a shame. I knew the Daybells. She was close to one of Chad's sons. And she was saying, it's just, such a tragedy. I knew them so well." And she goes, "Now I keep my distance." And I thought that was interesting, but it was so heartbreaking to her to have this tragedy right in her neighborhood. And then, of course, you have the local stores in the area, and they're asking us, "Why are you guys in town? Have you guys heard anything? It's such a shame there's not any murder charges yet." Again, this is obviously before the indictment was released. But everyone here still talks about it, and everyone has been waiting for something to happen. In fact, we were across the street from one of the courthouses, and there was a house, and we looked over and we saw a sign in the yard with JJ and Kylie's faces on it, and it said, "Always in our hearts." So this has really affected this small community. It's really a tight-knit community. And I also want to note that when we were here last year in Idaho, one of the small-town newspapers, one of the reporters, she was talking to me, and she was like, "Oh, it's such a shame about Tammy. I wrote her obituary, and I knew her through the library." So, like you said, Tammy and the Daybells in general, they're well established in this area, and Tammy was really well known because I think she worked in a library as well as at the school district. So she knew a lot of people. She had a lot of connections in this area. So I can imagine that the charges in her death as well is a huge shock for people in this area.
Yeah, really hitting home there. So what happens next in this case?
That's a good question. Now we wait to see if we can find out any more of this evidence. But yesterday when Lori had her initial appearance, right away, well, first of all, it started late. And then the judge said, "I got some exigent information right before we started this from Lori's attorney. He's asking for a continuance." The state prosecutor objected that, but the judge said, "I'm going to go ahead and continue given the information I was just given." So we don't know what that is. So her initial appearance hasn't happened yet. And we're wondering what that could mean. What is this new information? As far as Chad goes, he had his charges read to him, and he will be arraigned on June 9th.
Wow. So things happening behind the scenes that we're not even aware of, but that will likely percolate and come forward soon. And I think the next big sort of bombshell in this case will likely be at some point in the next 60 days when prosecutors have to alert the defense attorneys whether or not they're going to seek the death penalty, because the death penalty is on the table there in Idaho. Right. That's going to be a big one.
Yeah, I think I know Kay and Larry have kind of mentioned that they're looking for the death penalty, and they said that, what's another 60 days? We can wait that long. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that.
So this has pretty much been a wrap-up of the latest events that have happened in this case, but we called this Episode 0, and we called it Episode 0 for a reason, because this is just the beginning of our new podcast. And we want to thank you for joining us for this, our first Lori Vallow Deadly Delusions podcast. From here, we're going to go back in time and start at the beginning with a death in Chandler. Chapter 1 is available right now, and then every 2 weeks, we're going to produce a new episode where we will take a fine-tooth comb to this case and everybody involved in it.
Yeah, thanks again for listening. This podcast written and reported by Kim Powell and Morgan Loew. Lori Vallow's Deadly Delusions is a production of Arizona's Family, CBS 5, 3 TV, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.
All right, Kim, have a safe flight back to Phoenix, and we'll see you soon.
All right, thank you.